Let's talk about insights, how to actually have more insights. Not only that, but how to go from having an intellectual insight to a felt, embodied insight. Now, here's the thing, there isn't really a recipe or a how to in the sense that you can't will insights. You can't force insight. It's an accident of sorts, but you can definitely become more accident prone. This is Jurgen Rasmussen, by the way. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis channel. So, the first thing I would look at to become more accident prone is to just intend it. Use the power of intent. The power of intent is way more powerful than most people realize, even when it comes to evoking what you could call unconscious behaviors or shifts in perception. I'll give you a couple of examples of this. I practice martial arts, and every Friday I spar Muay Thai or Thai boxing. And in Thai boxing, you use kicks, punches, knees, and elbows, and some sweeps and some trips. Now, if you have a good round with sparring, you just kind of find yourself slipping the shots or countering, because if you have to deliberately think it, the opponent's gone, the moment's over. So you're having the intent to hit and not get hit. And when you're in flow, everything just emerges in a kind of non volitional way. Now, here's the really interesting thing. Sometimes my training partners and I might decide, you know what? Next round, only Western boxing. So that means no kicks, no elbows, no knees, only Western boxing. If you spar with someone who's experienced, no one will slip a jab and rip a left hook to the body, for example. Or, no, they will do that during Western boxing. No one will, when the other person's jabbing, throw a low kick during the Western boxing round. It just doesn't happen. Now, the counters and the moves that happen in the flow state still happen in a non-volitional way, but there's no low kicks or knees or elbows that emerge out of the flow. The only thing that's different is the intent. Or we might decide, let's do a round of mixed martial arts sparring, and now suddenly someone shoots in for a double leg takedown when the other person throws a right cross. Again, inflow emerges automatically. Or if you can't relate to martial arts, maybe you've had the experience of being able to intend to wake up, let's say at 7 a.m. or 8 p.m., and beating the alarm. I can do that. I can I can set the intent to wake up at a particular time, and it almost always works. I almost always beat the alarm. Now I have to get up or reset the alarm, or I fall asleep again. Now, how the mind body system does that, I have no idea, but I know that I can set the intent. So if you set the intent to discover more insights, you already become way more accident prone, because there are opportunities to have insights all over the place. This is one reason why a lot of people have insights during seminars or retreats or conversations that are defined as coaching conversations, because people have that particular insight. So, or that particular intent. Now, another little trick that you can do, I remember I had a couple of scientists as clients for a period. And they talked about how they could work on something really hard in the lab and really like exhaust their minds. And then when they were done for the day, they went and they did something completely different, whether that was rock climbing or making food or playing tennis or swimming or meditating or whatever. But they made sure to go do something completely different. And they would often leave the lab when a particular task was unresolved, meaning they hadn't quite finished it. Now, what would happen from time to time is that sometimes during flow in those other activities while chopping wood or whatever they were doing, when the mind cleared enough, some new, fresh thought would emerge. Or sometimes during shaving later or being in the shower, some hunch or some inclination of where to move next or what to look at might emerge. Now, I don't think it's the shower in of itself or the shaving in of itself. What I think happens is that during those moments, people have nothing on their mind. They have very little thinking going on. And now, new thoughts, new fresh insights can emerge. If you're a coach, something you can also do to facilitate this is to use what they in psychology call the Zeigarnik effect. And back in the day, someone observed, a guy called Zeigarnik, who was amused by how people who worked at restaurants could remember table orders. You know, that person wants this and that, and you might have a lot of different people at a table with a lot of different requests. And the people who worked the tables would memorize these large lists, but as soon as they gave them to the chef, it was gone. So incomplete information is more memorable. If you look at a soap opera or a really good series, what they have a tendency to do is they will start a story over here with these two people. And then once it kind of gets exciting, they move somewhere else. And they build up something else with these people over here. And once that gets exciting, they might go to a third context or back to the original context. So when these, and before the episode ends, something dramatic is building, and then the episode is over, right? And of course, when I grew up, you only had one TV channel here in Norway, and you had to wait until next Friday, for the episode to continue. Of course, now with Netflix and everything, you can instantly download things. But what happens then is that people's unconscious minds, if you will, since the information is incomplete, keeps working behind the scenes. And then if you have these fresh moments where you have very little on your mind, you might get inclinations or you might get insights. In the context of change, Milton Erickson, the late medical doctor and hypnosis pioneer, was an expert regarding this. He was very clear that all he ever did was to bring the weather, was to organize a learning context for people. And he would often use drama, shock, humor, storytelling, and he would often not quite complete the stories. And he would have all these kind of nested loops and open loops. And the intent of that is, again, when you complete the story, the mind will often conclude and go, yep, got that, and it's over, right? But with these open loops, the mind, you avoid premature closure. The search kind of continues, right? Which is what you're looking for. If you have a coach, I would urge you to go into the sessions and practice just listening the way you would listen if you listen to soft, pleasant music. You see, most of us don't really listen. We listen to argue, or we listen to talk. We listen to tell our story. We listen to see if something matches what we already believe. And it's more difficult to have fresh thinking or to see or hear something new if you do that. But if you listen the way you would listen if you listen to soft, pleasant music, if you just bathe into the suggestions and you're really open, you might hear something new. Something else too, Daniel Kahneman, the old psychologist, uh, who won a Nobel Prize in economics, he used to say, what you see is all there is. And he warned people about confusing internal coherence with a complete understanding. Meaning that if you have relatively few pieces of a puzzle regarding a particular topic and someone tells you a story, it's easy to set those pieces together, and once you do, you get the feeling that you understand. Now, what I want to encourage you to do is to be skeptical of that feeling of understanding. So if your mind goes, oh yeah, I get this, yep, I got that, heard that before, I know exactly what that is, know that that is internal coherence. That's a signal that your mind is shutting down in a sense. It's concluding, it's getting premature closure. So if you can take the feeling of understanding or the feeling of understanding something and use that as a warning sign to open back up, to get curious, to listen for what you haven't heard, to look for what you haven't seen, that's something different. Another thing that's a really nice habit to do is to begin to, whenever, if someone says something and you find yourself shutting down, you find yourself getting angry or provoked, or you feel an urge to argue or to shut the person down or to have the person get censored, or you want to call the person a bigot or a fascist or whatever. If you can stop and just realize that, one of my deep assumptions just got challenged. And you can make that assumption visible and look at it and listen with a fresh mind. That's an opportunity to see something new. Same if someone says something and it feels really great. Yes, this person's completely right. Yes, this is exactly how things works. Yes, this feels wonderful. If you can from time to time during that state too go, this person just confirmed one of my deeper assumptions. Let's get curious. What am I assuming here, really? Something else you can do that a lot of my clients have found useful over the years is if they have very strong opinions on something, to actually go out in public and do your best to argue for the opposite position. Argue for exactly the position that you don't believe in. Clients are often stunned by how much they get out of this simple exercise. Sometimes they object and they go, why would I ever do that? And I say to them, well, if you can understand your, let's say, political opponent's position well enough that you can pass as one of them, then you'll get way better at arguing for your own position. So in that sense, you win. But you might also see something new that allows you to revise and update your own map and your own very way of understanding. So in any sense, you win. Something else I would urge you to do is if you listen to spiritual teachers, if you listen to podcasts, YouTube videos, if you read books, try a different teacher. Sometimes it just takes a slightly different metaphor, a slightly different angle for someone to suddenly see something. So I've been working with someone recently who's had a lot of overthinking and anxiety and stuff like that. And all of my work has revolved around this basic idea that you can just leave your thoughts alone. Not saying try to make them go away or stop them or And he's worked with several people, and for the first 3 sessions or so with me, it didn't seem to do anything. But then in the final session, he suddenly went, you know what? I think I got it. I think I finally heard it. Of course, I didn't make him hear it. I'm just a tour guide. But I would use slightly different metaphors, slightly different stories, slightly different conversations, slightly different tasks. Read up on other people's awakening experiences where they have awakened to the illusory nature of thinking, or where they have discovered the distinction between thinking and consciousness, these sorts of things. Because if you read other people's stories and you listen, sooner or later you're going to find someone with a story that deeply resonates with you. And you might not necessarily have any inkling beforehand as to when that is going to happen. Here's another thing that you might do. Practice lightening up. Practice slowing down. I worked with a guy recently from the States who had anger issues. And his life was so, he worked in the business world in a pretty rough environment. So he had all these musts and all these have tos that looked very real to him. And he was used to just shutting down his emotional life to just get done whatever he needed to get done, right? And that came at a big price. But when he was suddenly able to see that, wait a minute, the psychological stress comes from the discrepancy between how life is unfolding and all these stories about how life should be unfolding in a different way. Once he kind of saw that and was able to see the illusory nature of it, his mind dramatically slowed down, and he got access to felt sense again, and he started having more and more insights in this direction. There's always the opportunity for insight if you look for it. I'll give you a couple of recent events from my clients. So not long ago, I had a client in my office who I was attempting to help him to see that what you experience at all times is just what the thought process thinks is going on. That's your felt experience. And he didn't quite get it because he thought that I'm just reacting to the facts of life, right, and reality. And this was in the office, and suddenly we both heard this buzzing sound, and we both got curious about what that was. And I discovered it was a big wasp, and I got so enthusiastic about killing it, right? And first I wasn't able to, and he was like, no, no, no. And then I killed the wasp, right? And I turned around and I smiled, and I was so happy with this quick, efficient kill, right? And he was horrified. And he started talking about, the bees, and how we everything is life and this and that. And suddenly I just stopped and I smiled at him with this kind of expectancy that he was going to see something. I just kind of intended that, right? And he slowed down and he suddenly went, oh shit. We suddenly saw it. How, yes, there's a guy killing the wasp, but we both experienced what our thinking processes thought it meant. And that's the kind of virtual reality that we all live in. I saw another client the other day. I approached her. I'd been walking by the river, and she was a bit early. First session, I walked up to her. She looked very joyous and happy. She was talking to a friend on the phone, in an excellent mood. I introduced myself. She was still in an excellent mood. Let's call her Christina. And we went into the office. She sat down. I said, okay, so Christina, what's up? What brings you here? And immediately she started crying. And she started telling this story, which to me were clearly thoughts, right? But for her, They looked like reality, and she had a mini panic attack. I just, I was completely calm, so I just leaned in. I kind of smiled and I said, most people do survive the first session. And I think that was just such a different response that she was expecting. So it functions as a pattern interrupt, and I started laughing and she started chuckling. And I said to her, you were so happy out there a couple of minutes ago. She said, yes, 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 I was. I was in an excellent mood. And I said, no matter what has happened in your life, no matter what your genetics are, you were happy 2 minutes ago. And she was like, yes. So what happened? And she suddenly realized, with a little bit of coaching, that thinking had happened. And from then, it was relatively easy to get her to see that, wait a minute, you only have an experience of something when you think it. Like, if it's not in your thinking, it's not in your experience. And that was a profound shift, right? But it still looked as if certain thoughts then were scary. But then I had her practice deliberately thinking the same thoughts, this time knowing that she was thinking. And first she got calm, and then she started laughing. And from that point, it was relatively easy to help her discover that the thinking process itself was neutral, and the content of the thinking is neutral. Because first she had a mini panic attack, then she was calm, and then she had a sense of absurdity, and it was the same train of thought, which shows that the thoughts themselves have no innate power. There is no secret sauce. There's no special ingredient. Something else I always do with clients is I tell them stories to kind of build expectancies that they can have insights over time, and they can deepen them over time. I remember once, many years ago, a new client came in who had been referred to me by a previous client, and she said, I know exactly what's going to happen. I said, really? What's that? She said, well, tell all these stories. They're not going to make sense. I'm going to leave the office feeling probably a bit disappointed that nothing happened. And then in 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to just have this amazing insight. And everything's going to change. That's what happened to her friend. And she thought that there was something in the process that kind of made that happen, right? So I've learned to tell stories like that to kind of set that expectancy. So a few years ago, I worked with a woman in California. In California, they have this juice chain, by the way, called Jamba Juice. She loves Jamba Juice, right? And I did a thought experiment with her, and she kind of intellectually got this notion that once you kind of think something up, it looks real, but the moment the thought stops, it's gone. So yeah, it kind of makes sense, but... And then she was out driving, and she was in a near accident because someone in the opposite lane did this really cheeky thing, and she got furious, right? Road rage. And she realized, I'm way too angry to be on the road. So she drove off the road, and she'd never been to that area of town before, and she drove into the parking lot of a Jamba Juice. And she saw this offer for this big Jamba Juice thing, and she just got so happy, because that was a surprise. And she leaped out of her car and she walked inside the juice shop, and suddenly it hit her like a ton of bricks. She was raging 4 minutes ago, and now she was happy. What happened? The thought stopped. Some new thought appeared. And that looked like reality too. So I hope this has been useful for you. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask them. If you want to do sessions with me to work on something or deepen your insights, you can reach me by sending an email through provocativehypnosis.com. And if you're watching this in 2025, In September, I'm starting a new course. It's a How to See Through the Self-Illusion Masterclass. So hit the seminar page at provocativehypnosis.com if you're interested. If you like this video, please like it and please subscribe to the channel. As always, thanks for listening.